The Stanley Cup Finals rolls on, but the offseason moves continue for the other 30 teams around the NHL. We've got two big trades to break down and an amazing Game 5 between the Oilers and Panthers. You're listening to the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On NHL podcast. It is the Wednesday Eastern Conference edition of the show. Typically, it's a Battle of Ontario version between myself, Mike DiStefano, the Locked On Leafs host, and Ross Levitan of Locked On Ottawa Senators, but he's unable to join us today. So I got my man Trey Matthews joining me, and it's perfect for Trey Matthews to join us today because the flag in the background right behind him, that team made a massive blockbuster trade today. So we're going to talk about it and we're going to get into it for sure. But I think we should start with what went down last night and what was one of the best games, if not the best game of the series, in my opinion, between the Oilers and the Florida Panthers. Before we continue, I do want to remind you that today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Trey, did you thoroughly enjoy that Game 5 last night and that dominating performance by Austin Matthews, Freudian slip, by Connor McDavid, as much as I did, my good friend?
Absolutely, and don't worry, the Toronto Maple Leafs will get there at some point. Same with the Devils, hopefully. But I genuinely did enjoy it. I must admit, though, I was a little bummed out because I had the Panthers winning this series, and I thought they were really going to close it out in Florida. I really did. I thought Matthew Tkachuk was going to follow the same script as his buddy Jason Tatum and the Boston Celtics, who beat the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA in 5 games. I thought it was going to be a gentleman's sweep for the Panthers, but unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to view it, the Oilers, they came out to play. Like, they wanted to make history, and Connor McDavid, he is just phenomenal, and I'm running out of adjectives to describe it. Back-to-back games and back-to-back 4-point performances. I think we're getting to the point where, regardless of the outcome, could he legitimately win the Conn Smythe Trophy? Wow. Is that a possible chance? Now, as a Devils content creator, as someone who is a credentialed media member, I know that might be a tough pill to swallow if you're a Panthers fan, because Martin Brodeur was in a similar situation years ago where he should have won the Conn Smythe Trophy, but didn't, despite being on the winning team. That's definitely a tall order, and it can definitely rub some people the wrong way. But come on, he's done something that not even Wayne Gretzky or has done in a while, because it's like Wayne Gretzky, multiple 4-point performances during his respective Stanley Cup run years ago. Connor McDavid.
No. He never did it in back-to-back games. He never did it in a Stanley Cup final in back-to-back games. McDavid's the only man in history to ever do it. Gretzky's done it in back-to-back playoffs, but he's never done it in back-to-back Stanley Cup final games. So it does make it even more, I guess, amazing what McDavid's doing. He's putting up bigger than Gretzky numbers like that. Like, it's video game numbers what this guy's been able to do the last couple of games, back-to-back games with 4 points here to take his team out of the gutter, down 3-0 in the series. It's seemingly over, and all of a sudden this guy says, nope, hop on my back, boys, and just puts on 2 spectacular performances for his team. And we got a series here, Trey. Like, there's a series here now. Like, at one point it felt like it was over in 4 or 5 games. The Panthers were just too good, too overmatched. It just seemed like Bobrovsky was on another level. You weren't going to beat him. None of that really is the way it is anymore. Like, 2 games later, you're sitting here and you're like, Bobrovsky hasn't been that great. Got pulled after giving up 5 goals in the game before. And then last night, I mean, a couple of the goals he allowed were not good, especially the first McDavid one that went right between his legs. It's like, that is not something that Bobrovsky typically allows. So, I'm starting to wonder, man, if the Oilers could do the impossible, the unthinkable, and pull off the reverse sweep here. Because at this point, I mean, they go back into Edmonton, that building's going to be rocking. Like Florida, they needed to get that win last night. I really think we got a series here, and it's anyone's cup at this point.
I will say this. It is definitely more interesting. And I'll keep myself honest. I originally predicted Panthers in 6. Obviously, this is not how I anticipated for it to go down. I'm still sticking by my prediction. I think the Panthers will still win and close it out, but it's going to be difficult going to Rogers Place and performing in that hostile environment. And to add on to what Connor McDavid has done throughout the course of the playoffs, he surpassed Wayne Gretzky for most assists during a playoff run. And anytime you can surpass Wayne Gretzky in any category or do something that even he hasn't been able to do, especially when we're comparing the eras, it's incredible what Connor McDavid is doing. And honestly, like I said, regardless of the outcome, if he is awarded the Conn Smythe Trophy, I think it's well-deserved, whether he's on the or not.
I agree. And you talk about passing Gretzky records. This guy's now just 5 points back of tying Wayne Gretzky for most points all time in one playoff run. And you brought up a really good point in eras. Like, this is a different era. You don't score as much now than you did in the 80s. Like, there's a lot more scoring going on in the 80s than there is now, especially in the playoffs. I mean, how many games have we seen that have been 3-2, 2-1, 4-1? Like, these have been low-scoring games. The unders are hitting at an abnormal rate over on FanDuel. Meanwhile, you've got McDavid out here just cooking. And the last couple games, man, it's been a man on a mission. Like, truly a man on a mission. He's making a statement. And I don't know if you remember that right at the beginning of the series, there was some chump out in Florida who had to go on his soapbox and try and, get people riled up, I'm sure. But he wrote about McDavid and he called him Mick overrated. But look what he is doing. He's not overrated. He was talking about how people called him McJesus and blah, blah, blah. He's not generational. He's never won anything. All this nonsensical garbage. Look what he is doing now that he has an opportunity. He could taste it. He's so close to the cup, and he's putting his team on his back, and he's truly showing, I am the best in the world. It's not even particularly close, and I am going to do everything I can to win games for me and my team, because I don't know if you noticed, but like Draisaitl's not 100%. Like, he's not healthy. He wasn't really a factor last night and hasn't been for a couple of games. It's truly McDavid, like, just pulling this team the last couple of games to keep their season alive and force this thing to 6, maybe 7, maybe even a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I'm usually not a fan when one particular player is carrying your team, but you got to do whatever you can do to keep your team's head above water. And that's what he's doing. And what he's doing, nothing short of phenomenal. And to that reporter in Florida, I wish I could use certain adjectives and choice words to describe that sort of stupidity. But
let's just go with moron. You're a moron, whoever said that.
But I will be polite. And the thing is like, I just think
Canadian.
I'm still sticking by the Panthers because I think collectively they're the better team. Because you mentioned Sergei Bobrovsky, 2-time Vezina Trophy winner. I think Aaron Ekblad, he's a very underrated defenseman.
You don't think it could be in their heads that they're, especially Bobrovsky, because if you recall what happened last year at the Cup Final, he was amazing. All of a sudden, the Cup Final rolls around, and he had one bad game, and it snowballed from there. And he ended up getting lit up. Like, I think it was 8-3 or 9-3 was like the actual final game. Like, he wasn't good in the Cup Final. Tkachuk was hurt, sure. The team ran out of gas. But specifically, Bobrovsky was not the same Bobrovsky he was the 2-3 series prior. And I feel like the last couple of games, we're seeing a similar story unfold. And if Bobrovsky can't come up with those big miraculous saves, I mean, McDavid and company can put the pressure on and can generate offense and score 4 or 5 goals in a game if the goaltending isn't going to be spectacular. So Bobrovsky, unless he can get his game back, Like, that to me is going to be the key. Like, for the Florida Panthers going into Game 6 here, you've got to get Bobrovsky's confidence back because it's been shot the last couple of games. It has to be. If they want to win the cup, if they want to win in 6, it's got to be solely, legitimately on him to get his game back.
And they got to get better at special teams. You cannot be giving up shorthanded goals like that. That was a recipe for disaster. But going back to what I was trying to say, yes, Bobrovsky, I think, he has returned to earth, but I still have confidence in him. And Matthew Tkachuk, he can someday win the Hart Trophy. Sam Reinhart, he led this team in points. Vladimir Tarasenko, I think he was a solid addition at the trade deadline. Carter Verhaeghe, underrated. Rodriguez, I think he's been a solid contributor during the final as well. Yeah. I think this Panthers team, they just need to keep their composure, calm, cool, collected, heading into Rogers Place. Block out all the noise and the distractions. You're still in the driver's seat. But it is possible to overcome a 3-0 deficit and win the series, as proven in hockey. It's only happened in baseball once. It's never happened in basketball. The last team to overcome a 3-0 deficit and win a series was the LA Kings against the San Jose Sharks. That was 10 years ago. But it is possible.
And what happened that year?
The Kings ended up winning the cup over the Rangers. So I'm not going to complain about that. But I've also spoken to Chico Resch, who was on an Islanders team that overcame not one, but 2 3-0 deficits. They ended up winning one of the series, but they ended up losing the very next series after falling into a 3-0 hole, but forced it to a Game 7. It is entirely possible, especially when you have the best player on the planet suiting up for you. And you got Leon Draisaitl, Zach Hyman, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Evan Bouchard. I think the Oilers are really good when it comes to offense, but collectively, the Panthers, they just play bully-style hockey. And this pun is intended, well-oiled machine.
Yeah, they are. They're the better team. They're the deeper team. And they usually have the better goaltending. But there's one guy who can always make the biggest difference of them all. And he doesn't play for that team. He does play on the other side. In the last 2 games, he's proven that he can level any playing field and maybe surpass it. So I'll be excited to see what he's got in store for us for Game 6. Hopefully he can keep it going. Just need 2 more games. 2 more games out of that guy playing the same way, going legend mode, as we like to call it. And who knows what could happen. But I'm really, really excited for it. Game 6 going down Friday night in Edmonton. Looking forward to it. 30 other teams, though, it's the offseason for them, and they're finally starting to make some big moves, some big waves happening in the NHL, including your I was going to say your Locked On Devils, but your Devils made a massive trade today. So let's come back. Let's get into it. Another big deal also made between the Kings and Capitals. Goaltending making their rounds, a little goaltender carousel. We'll break it all down next here on the Locked On NHL podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which often makes getting tickets faster and easier. Price on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from receipt, and the lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They've got last-minute deals where you can save up to 60% off buying your last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy events, and theater seats. They've got flash deals, they've got zone deals, all in pricing and their lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back into the Locked On NHL podcast. It's Mike DiStefano and Trey Matthews of the Locked On Devils podcast joining us for today's show in place of Ross Levitan. I am of Locked On Leafs. And the Leafs apparently were in on the Jacob Markstrom sweepstakes, but ultimately it was your Devils, Trey, who came away with the big win there. And he is now a New Jersey Devil. So the trade is Jacob Markstrom to the Devils for a 2025 first-round pick, which is top 10 protected, and defensive prospect Kevin Ball. And the Flames are retaining 31.5% of the salary cap, which means the Devils are on the hook for just $4.125 million AAV next year. Is there one more year after this too? Is there 2 years left on that deal or just the 1 year?
So he has this upcoming season and then next year.
Right. So for 2 years. So he's locked in for 2 more years. The Devils got themselves a goaltender, Trey. What does this do for this team?
Well, for right now, doesn't do much. And this might be controversial, but no, hear me out. Hear me out for a second. Okay. They got a goaltender, and that's great and all. But they still got to find some more defensive assets to put in front of Markstrom, because if you have weak defense but good goaltending, that could go to waste. And vice versa. If you have strong defense but weak goaltending, that can also go to waste. For the time being, I'm glad that they got Jacob Markstrom. That was crucial, and that was definitely a need. But the thing is like you still have some more work to do, and I touched on this in one of my latest episodes. The job is not finished. You still need to get a bottom 6 forward to add more depth in that sort of aspect, because you got to replace the productivity of Miles Wood and also Michael McLeod. And then for the defensive side of things, you got Dougie Hamilton, Shimon Nemitz, and Luke Hughes. All 3 of those players, they're not going to focus on defense. They are offensive-minded defensemen. And then John Marino and Yoda Siegenthaler, they're solid, not spectacular. And who's going to replace Kevin Ball now? Seamus Casey? I hope not, because that doesn't help you defensively. So Tom Fitzgerald still has some work to do, and I hate to be that guy, but I'll just say I love Jacob Markstrom. I think at the price the Devils got him at, good deal. But there's still work that needs to be done if the Devils want to make it far in the playoffs and hopefully get to the Stanley Cup Final within next year or two.
You're crazy. You're crazy. Absolutely crazy. I mean, obviously you know this team better than I do, I guess. You cover it on a daily basis. So, I accept that. But I thought you'd be jumping through hula hoops. I've been saying all along, this team, they get a goalie. This team jumps right up into the top as contender status. Like, I'm telling you, at this point, this team is an Eastern Conference contender. Like, think about all that has gone wrong for the Devils the last couple of years, and they still almost made the playoffs, realistically, with terrible. They have .896 goaltending this season, like a .312 goals against combined between all the 6 goalies that they used this year. You had injuries to Jack Hughes, injuries to Nico Hischier, injuries to Timo Meier. Obviously, Dougie Hamilton missed most of the year. You got a healthy squad. You add Markstrom in net, and hey, free agency right around the corner. By allowing Calgary to keep 30% of that Markstrom contract, there might be a little bit of money to go out and make some additions on the blue line like you're talking about. I think the Devils are in really, really good shape here. You just went right to the negative. I'm like, what? You got to be ecstatic. You went straight to the negative.
Mike. I love Jacob Markstrom. I've been talking about him on my show the last few weeks. I said, this is the best avenue that Tom Fitzgerald can go on and get a goalie on the down low, because it seemed like Markstrom and his relationship with the front office was a little strained, and he waived his no movement clause in order to get dealt to New Jersey. That's been known for the last few months. Let me read you a tweet courtesy of Bryce Salvador. He said, with the big baller being Kevin Ball, being traded, you have to think the Devils have a big, greedy defenseman or two next on their radar. Can't go into the season with all skill and no snarl on the back end. That's just the point I'm trying to make. And maybe I articulated it wrong. I'm excited for Jacob.
No, I think you made a solid point, but I expected for you to be like, hey, this is great, but we still got to remember this. You went right to the negative. It just caught me off guard. I got to be honest. It's like you forgot to show that you were excited.
It's probably because I've said it on my show. I've written an article about it for Pucks and Pitchforks. Getting a goalie is not the only thing on the Tom Fitzgerald wish list. And just so no one takes this out of context, let me make something perfectly clear for the third time. Love Jacob Markstrom, excited for him, and that is definitely a good step for the Devils. But the job is not finished. There still needs work to be done in order for the Devils to take their organization even higher. And it starts with adding more physicality and more defensive-minded defensemen, similar to John Marino, similar to Jonas Siegenthaler. They can look at the open market. They can look at trade scenarios. Tom Fitzgerald was rumored to say he's interested in getting a top 6 forward, a bottom 6 forward, a top 4 defenseman, and a bottom 4 defenseman. They got the goalie, check that off the list. Now you still got some more work to do. Personally, I say get more assets defensively and get a bottom 6 forward. And this team, who knows, maybe they can go to the Stanley Cup Final. I don't think anyone was projecting for Edmonton and Florida to be in the Stanley Cup Final last year, were they? I don't know.
Florida maybe, because they literally were in the
they were there, but they were a while. But you know, it's like people were saying like they were the underdogs, they were the wild card. Yeah, so the circumstance is a little different. People now know about them a little bit more. But Edmonton probably not, especially since they made a coaching change early in the season.
Yeah, well, they were last place like the first 3 weeks of the year, and then I would say they gained some respect when they went and won 16 straight games. That's when people started to take notice. But yeah, who knows? Maybe the Devils next year. They got a new coach, obviously, in Sheldon Keefe, and this will be the best goaltender that Keefe's ever had. I can guarantee you that. So I like Keefe as a coach. I'm a big Keefe fan, by the way. Like I understood that Toronto, it was time to move on from Toronto, and it was the correct decision to let him go. But ultimately, you know, I think that he is a solid coach. I think he'll get the best out of the Devils. And, you know, if you can hone in on that structure and get good goaltending, you know, Keefe's systems work really well. So I like what the Devils got going for him and making this deal to get Markstrom. It took a while, right? It was something that was close, supposedly, to happening at the deadline, and then things fell apart. But I think everyone kind of assumed that talks would rekindle in the offseason and this deal would cross the finish line. And it ultimately did today. And I think the Devils did tremendous, just giving up, you know, top 10 protected 2025 first round pick. Didn't have to give up the 10th overall. I assumed that any deal. Did you think that they were going to have to get Markstrom? I had just assumed they would have to.
Not for Markstrom. I said, okay, maybe you can offer another draft pick this year, or maybe if you really want to, you can entertain trading away your first round draft pick next year. But they learned their lesson from the Corey Schneider fiasco over 10 years ago, in which they traded away the 9th overall pick for Corey Schneider, who got off to a really good start, but fizzled out towards the end of his Devils tenure. And that 9th overall pick became Bo Horvat, and Horvat became captain of the Canucks years later. So they learned their lesson, which is, okay, do not sacrifice the 10th overall pick, but see if you can try to find another way to do it. And that's why that first round pick is top 10 protected in case the Devils have a bad year next year and they can, quote unquote, tank, and it goes back to them if it lands in the top 10. Or you become title contenders, you make a deep playoff run, and you don't even care about the playoffs at that point. So
I expect that to happen more so than them ending up with like the 6th overall pick next year. I think they'll be in a really good spot. Markstrom and Jake Allen as a 1-2 tandem.
And here's the thing. I want to add on to that. They're only paying both of them $6.05 million combined this year because the Canadians retained half of Allen's salary at the deadline. And now the Flames retain 31.25% of Markstrom's contract. So that's actually, since that's their 1-2 punch, and they're only being paid around $6 million, and we're in a market where goalies are spread thin, that's a pretty good tandem that Tom Fitzgerald has put together, and he didn't have to break the bank for it.
Yep. He deserves a lot of credit for the way that he was able to rebuild that goaltending corpse that was there at the beginning of last year. It'll look a hell of a lot different in training camp this year than it did at training camp just a year ago. So that was the one trade, the first domino to fall, and then we saw another starting goaltender hit the trade market and go southward to Los Angeles from Washington. We'll tell you who that is on the other side. It's Mike DiStefano, Trey Matthews filling in today. You're listening to the Locked On NHL podcast. Welcome back into the Locked On NHL podcast. Mike DiStefano with Trey Matthews. Trey of Locked On Devils. Mike DiStefano, myself of Locked On Maple Leafs. So, yeah, it was a busy afternoon in the NHL. You had Markstrom get traded, and then you saw just a few minutes later, maybe an hour later or so, Darcy Kuemper gets dealt from the Washington Capitals to the LA Kings. A 1-for-1 deal. Kuemper to LA for Pierre-Luc Dubois, PLD, heading to the nation's capital down south. What did you make of this trade, Trey?
I was like, wait, what? I'm sorry. Excuse me? Because the Kings were in need of a goalie. Let's be perfectly clear. And Darcy Kuemper, he has experience being a goalie out west because he won a Stanley Cup with the Colorado Avalanche. The thing is, they won in spite of him, not because of him, just for clarity's sake. But he was still, he still played a piece, but he wasn't like the main reason, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Darcy Kuemper going to the LA Kings, that's great for LA. And for Pierre-Luc Dubois, I'm just like, what are the Capitals doing? Like, what are they? Why would they trade Darcy Kuemper for Pierre-Luc Dubois? What's the upside here? Like, what's their mindset? I was a little, like everyone on social media, like anyone a part of the NHL discourse, I'm just left pondering and scratching my head. I'm just like, okay, this makes sense for the LA Kings, but for the Washington Capitals, I'm a little perplexed.
Yeah, it is one that definitely you raise an eyebrow over, and you're thinking, what's the catch? Like, how much retention did the Kings have? And like the fact that it's no retention, 1-for-1, full pop for full pop was a little weird considering the season that Pierre-Luc Dubois is coming off of, and he's got 7 more years left on that contract at $8.5 million. And he played like a fourth liner, like legitimately. The guy was terrible this past season. In year one of that 8-year deal, he had just 40 points, 16 goals for Pierre-Luc Dubois. And it was just year one in LA after they traded a King's ransom to get him from Winnipeg last summer. And they already had to ship him out and only get a Darcy Kuemper in return. But Kuemper, I was looking into the note, like Kuemper didn't have a good year last season either with Washington, a 331 goals against and an 890 save percentage. And he lost the job to Charlie Lindgren. He became the backup goaltender for the Washington Capitals. So if you're Washington and you're sitting there and you're looking and you're like, we believe in Lindgren. He got us to the playoffs. He started for us and he was our guy. He turned into our number one. Why are we going to pay Darcy Kuemper $5.25 million over the next 3 years to be our backup goaltender? We might as well use that towards a player who there is potential in this player, right? Like at one point, Pierre-Luc Dubois, you looked at him and you're like, there's some like 1B strong number 2 center upside in this player. Early in his career in Columbus, you saw, a power forward playmaking center who could score and just be a real pest, a shutdown. Trust me, in Toronto, in that play-in series that they played against the Columbus Blue Jackets, he shut down Austin Matthews, and he was like 23 years old at the time. So maybe that's like one of my impressions that I have of Pierre-Luc Dubois. I know it's gone very south since. He's now on his second team since that series, or technically third team since that series. But you look at it, okay, 26, 27 years old. Maybe he can find his passion for the sport again and become that number 2 center, maybe even the number 1 center, like outside of Dylan Strome. Now that Nick Backstrom is retired and gone, they don't really have a centerman. Like that's a hole in Washington. So for a team that still wants to remain competitive and a team that just made the playoffs, they've got Ovechkin. They want him to make sure that he, is happy and still competing in this window that they have. They're rolling the dice that they can get the PLD of old back. And hopefully he can be, a 70-point two-way power forward center for them who could play first or second line minutes, play on the power play. That's really what they're hoping to get. It's a bit of a gamble and a roll of the dice, but there is some upside in taking Pierre-Luc Dubois big risk, big downside. You could continue just to wither away, but there is slight upside here and probably more upside than what Kemper could have given you as a backup.
I must say, the Washington Capitals, they've had a rough few months based on their performance in the Stanley Cup playoffs, now buying cap friendly and shutting it down next month, and now adding
That's good for them, but
it's great for them, not for us.
No.
I kind of need cap friendly to make sure that the Devils have like available cap space or not just $1 billion or something like that. But
Puckpedia is going to build up, and they'll be just as good as cap friendly in no time. I guarantee it.
Fingers crossed. But anyway, at this point for the Capitals, if the playoffs were any indicator, I think they've sort of lost passion a little bit. And because Alexander Ovechkin, he was pretty much a no-show. At this point, Ovechkin is just playing to break Wayne Gretzky's all-time goals record, which is amazing and phenomenal. And good for Ovechkin because he has I don't think he has anything left to prove. And that's a phenomenal record that I don't think anyone anticipated to be broken anytime soon. And he has 2 years remaining on his contract. I don't know. The battle for that playoff position, it was a lackadaisical battle between the Islanders, the Capitals, the Devils, the Penguins. It was just pretty much a race to see who's going to get eliminated in the first round of the playoffs at that point. Yeah. I just don't know the direction for the Capitals, quite honestly. I don't understand Pierre-Luc Dubois. I know you were trying to give
to compete. That is the direction. I think this clearly states they want to compete and remain competitive as long as Ovechkin is in the fold. As long as Ovechkin is there, they want to at least try and be competitive, and they feel that bringing in Pierre-Luc Dubois can help with that.
But how are you going to say that you want to be competitive when Ovechkin himself doesn't seem all that competitive? Because he was basically just a cone out there during the playoffs.
Ovi put up 26 goals in the last 30 games of the year. Ovi was unbelievable.
I'm talking about the playoffs.
Sure, but regardless, you got to also be competitive in the 82 games before the playoff. They played the Rangers. The Rangers were just way better than them. It was what it was. And competitive as in make the playoffs, not necessarily win a cup. That's the hope. But I think they just want to make sure that they're in the mix to win a playoff game or host a playoff game. And I think that's what this trade's all about.
Well, okay. We'll see what happens in the regular season, but it's just I don't know. The Capitals, they disappointed me in the playoffs a little bit. Maybe it's just because, I cover the Devils and I was hoping that they would give the Rangers some sort of trouble, but that didn't happen. But it's just I'm just still trying to figure this trade out. I think it's great for the Kings. I don't think it's great for the Capitals, if I'm being completely honest.
That's fair. I'm with you. Don't get me wrong. My overwhelming, sense of the deal is the Kings won for sure. Getting a guy who can start net for them, who's won a Stanley Cup. He's got that cup pedigree. He's an upgrade to Cam Talbot at this point for sure. So I do think that the Kings at this point have won the trade, but I wouldn't say Pierre-Luc Dubois' career is over. I think there's still a chance for him to rewrite his story and be a contributing member to a half decent team here in Washington. So maybe I'll wait and reserve judgment until a couple of years before I completely say what the hell were they doing bringing in Pierre-Luc Dubois.
Well, I'll just say this to end on a positive note: nowhere to go but up. I guess that's the mindset Pierre-Luc Dubois has to have.
For him,
rough few years. There's nowhere to go but up at this point. And your slate has been wiped clean now that you're on a new team, but your chances are kind of running low to prove yourself. I'm just saying.
Well, think about what was given up to acquire Pierre-Luc Dubois a year ago. A first-round pick, Gabe Vilardi, and I think Alex Iafallo, I believe, was also involved in that deal, and Rasmus Kupari, actually. So, 4 NHL pieces, including a first-round pick for Pierre-Luc Dubois. And a year later, all they were able to get was Darcy Kemper.
And I know Winnipeg, they got eliminated in the first round, but I'm sure they got to be laughing at the Kings. I'm just saying that. I think they are laughing at the Kings right now saying, yep, he was your problem, and unfortunately, he didn't pan out. Thanks for the assets.
Yep, absolutely. All right, buddy. Thanks for filling in. It was a lot of fun chatting puck with you, and obviously, it was a big day for you and your Devils. I thought you'd be a little more excited, but you seem to be a little timid on your Devils there.
It's just like we've been in this situation, or the Devils have been in this situation before. When they got Tyler Toffoli last year, I was thinking
a goaltender makes a world of a difference more than anyone else on the ice. I think we can agree with that. And the Devils, they've been searching for that goaltender really since Brodeur. So
I think, but it's hard to replace Brodeur. But it's like I was talking to Chico Resch about this in a conversation, which is you can have a good goalie, but if you have no defense, it won't really matter because their outings will go to waste. So the thing is, I am excited. And I hope, and I think Tom Fitzgerald got the right man, but now it's time to add even more. Job is not finished. Don't sit back on and like just say, okay, the offseason's good now. Let's go to development camp. Let's go to training camp. Let's do all that. You still need to add a few more decent physicality type pieces.
And I think they will. They're not going to sit on their hands. I think they know what they have in their group, and I think they're going to invest in it and bulk it up. And I think you'll be more pleased with the roster come training camp than I guess you are of the roster today. That's my opinion, at least. All right. Yeah. Appreciate you taking the time to join us, Trey. If you want to listen to more of Trey Matthews and get his full sense of the deal and whatever's going on with the Devils this offseason, you can check him out at Locked On Devils, also on Twitter at TreyMatt4. You can check me out if you're curious as to what's going on with the Toronto Maple Leafs. They struck out on Markstrom. They struck out on Kemper. Still a couple other goalies available, though. We'll be talking about that on Locked On Leafs tomorrow as well. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. This has been the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.